Domestic Abuse in Othello in present-day Canada by Raghav Bansal. What is domestic abuse? Before we start, if you don't know what domestic abuse is exactly, let me tell you. Domestic abuse is a pattern of behavior in any type of relationship that is used to gain or maintain power and control over their partners. Abuse can be physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, or threats of action that influence the other person. I chose this photo of a woman with a black eye whose ears and mouths are covered because I think that it represents domestic abuse very well, as it signifies that she has been abused and that she has been told to not say anything about it. Domestic abuse. Throughout the years, we've been able to advance and get rid of a lot of sexism and inequality, but not all. Take Shakespeare's Othello, for example. Othello takes place in the late 1500s in Venice, Italy. At that time, domestic abuse was a dominant factor and women had almost no power. Flash forward about 450 years later to 2020 Canada, and not much has changed. Just like William Shakespeare's Othello, domestic abuse is a rising problem for Canada for people of all kinds. I chose this photo of a woman in tears with her hands over her head because I think that it touches the point of an abusive relationship very well. Domestic abuse in Othello. In Othello, the main characters, Iago and Othello, were both very abusive husbands. Othello let his jealousy control him and used his masculinity to shame and abuse Desdemona several times in the play. Othello was caught many times striking and emotionally abusing Desdemona. I chose these two photos of Othello because these are scenes in which Othello is shown abusing Desdemona, so these photos were perfect. Othello quotes. Othello emotionally abuses Desdemona a lot throughout the play, mostly by calling her a whore or a devil. This happens whenever Othello is shown being angry with Desdemona, such as when he says, open quote, "She says enough, yet she's a simple bawd, that cannot take as much. This is a subtle whore, a closet lock and key villainous secrets, and yet she'll kneel and pray. I've seen her do it." Close quote. Othello, Act 4, Scene 2, line 20 to 23. Othello just puts Desdemona down. It makes her feel worthless. Othello was also caught physically abusing Desdemona many times. Othello slaps Desdemona because when he confronts her about cheating on him, she denies it. After Othello slaps Desdemona, he says, open quote, "If that the earth could teem with a woman's tears, each drop she falls would prove a crocodile out of my sight." Close quote. Othello, Act 4, Scene 1, lines 246 to 248. Othello mocks Desdemona for crying, as he thinks that she deserves to be slapped. Shakespearean plays are always tragedies, and in Othello, the tragic death started with Desdemona. Othello kills Desdemona, thinking that it's the right thing to do, as she is a whore and a cheat. Before Othello kills Desdemona, he says, open quote, "Therefore confess thy freely of thy sin. For to deny each article with the oath cannot remove nor choke the strong conceptions that I do groan withal. Thou art to die." Close quote. Othello, Act 5, Scene 2, lines 53 to 56. Othello's greatest act of abuse towards Desdemona was killing her, and he explains why it is necessary to do so. Iago wasn't much better. Unlike Othello's relationship with Desdemona, Iago's relationship with Emilia never had a positive side. Iago emotionally abuses Emilia several times in the play, such as when Emilia started to catch on to Iago's plan. After Iago offers to stab Emilia and denies her of going home if she keeps on talking, he calls her a, open quote, "villainous whore." Close quote. Othello, Act 5, Scene 2, line 228. Iago puts down and insults Emilia using similar vocabulary as Othello. Iago also physically abuses his wife, Emilia. Just like Othello, Iago kills his wife. Iago kills his wife because she knew the truth, and he was mad at her for telling everyone. Open quote, "The woman falls. Sure he hath killed his wife." Close quote. Othello, Act 5, Scene 2, line 235. Gratiano says this after Iago stabbed Emilia. Othello and Iago were both leading figures for the theme of domestic abuse in Othello. Othello was a play based in the 1500s, but has a very present theme. I chose this photo of a live action play of Othello to visually demonstrate the use of literature in these quotes. Domestic abuse in present day Canada. Domestic abuse is still very alive in Canada. Canada is home to approximately 38 million people, and on average, 1 in 4 people have witnessed or experienced domestic abuse in their lifetime. Although domestic abuse is a heinous act that can be done to anyone, it is predominantly done to females. Such as in 2009 when a woman was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. Telegraph writes, mother of one was murdered by her ex-boyfriend. George Appleton in 2009. Unbeknown to Miss Applewood, Appleton from Salford had a history of violence towards women. He was found 6 days after her murder, hanged in a derelict pub. Belfast Telegraph, 2020. This present-day situation is very much like Othello and Desdemona's relationship. Othello is like the ex-boyfriend, and Desdemona is like the murdered woman. Miss Wood is not alone. MacLean says, violence affects more than 1 billion children every year, in every country and in every community. MacLean's 2017. These children could have been abused by their parents, siblings, relatives, strangers, etc. In 2017, there were approximately 2.2 billion children in the world. So that means that just under half of those kids were affected by violence. During this pandemic, there has been an all-time high of domestic abuse situations. The Observer says, draconian funding cuts and subsequent closures of refugees have left thousands of men and women and children at the mercy of abusive partners. Many people will suffer in silence, trapped in situations that restrict their ability to contact an organization that can help them. The Observer 2020. Most abusive people are abusive when they are angry, frustrated, or sad. During this pandemic, in April alone, 2 million Canadians lost their job. Losing their job creates stress because it makes it very difficult to provide for their family. Also, being home gives people more of an opportunity to abuse their loved ones. I actually created this photo using a Canadian flag and a cartoon image of a hand with the word stop on it. I chose this photo because it effectively represents the theme of domestic abuse in Canada. Final thoughts. Shakespeare's Othello and present-day Canada have very similar themes of domestic abuse. Othello and Iago are both very abusive to their wives throughout the whole play. They emotionally and physically abuse them. Present-day Canada is not a whole lot different. In 2019 alone, the Toronto police recalled for 20,000 cases of domestic abuse. Believe it or not, abusive relationships and acts of domestic abuse are still happening to this day. People are living with abusive relationships and are still suffering. I chose to put a large Venn diagram showing a larger space for similarities than differences because it represents that there are more similarities than differences between the play Othello and present-day Canada. I also chose to add an image of a female holding up a sign saying, "I thought you loved me," to represent an abusive partner, and finally an image of a female with tape over her mouth to signify that she cannot speak out about what has happened to her. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed my presentation and I hope you learned something today.